All right, chapter 6, we are going to be talking about the nervous system. This will kind of fill in any gaps you might have had with the last chapter we talked about, especially when we talk about how do our nerves work? What is happening with the chemicals? How are they communicating with each other? This is kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. You might notice that my videos for 6.3 to 6.5 are a little bit old school. That's because I filmed those last year during quarantine and I did not know the benefit of technology. So just bear with me as you get to those videos. 6.1 and 6.2 should be a little bit of a better quality though. So in 6.1, we are learning, like I said, about how our body is actually like an electrical system. Our brain is a control center that's going to be receiving and sending signals to and from our body. And then the nervous system is what really delivers the signals to and from the brain to wherever it needs to go. The electricity that we have in our body that is conducting all these signals is very small, and it's going to usually be caused because of some kind of tension. So the nervous system controls both involuntary and voluntary movements. So basically it's controlling everything that our body is doing, from walking to our heart beating to digesting food to blinking, for you to raise your hand if you touch a hot pot. Your nervous system is telling you, hey, remove your hand from the hot pot before you get burned. So it's very complex and it's able to do a lot of things. There's two major parts to your nervous system. You have your central nervous system and you have your peripheral nervous system. As we go through this, I'm going to ask that you write extra notes on the side, or you have a blank piece of paper sitting next to you, because I'm going to be kind of drawing things, writing things that are not in your outline that will help you really understand this section a little bit more. So let's talk about your central nervous system first. Your central nervous system is made up of two main parts, your brain and your spinal cord. Between these two things, your entire nervous system is going to be controlled completely. Obviously, the importance of your, if you have any kind of injury to your brain and spinal cord, they could be detrimental and fatal. And so you need really good protection. Thankfully, we do have that. Praise the Lord. We have our wonderful skull and our vertebral column that protects the skull, protects the brain, and vertebral column protects the spinal cord. So those are super important and very good things to have that you want to make sure you are taking well care of as well, especially when you play sports. Then we're moving on to our peripheral nervous system. And peripheral nervous system, this is basically all of your nervous system except the brain and spinal cord, because the brain and spinal cord fall under your central nervous system. So these are going to be your spinal nerves that are going to go to and from your spinal cord, your cranial nerves that go to and from the brain. And then they also have sensory receptors, which basically are receptors that respond to some kind of stimulus, either from a pressure, change in temperature, some kind of pain you might have. So like this would be something like, hey, you're touching a hot pot, remove your hand. This would be more of your peripheral nervous system. And then you also have maybe you feel some kind of like injury and that pressure sends a stimulus to your brain saying, hey, like get out of this situation, things like that. So there are two types of nerves that are involved between your central nervous system, which are called afferent or efferent. Afferent nerves, they are from your sensory receptors. So you get afferent nerves from your skin, your muscles, your joints, and they take these stimulus or these messages to your central nervous system. So they go away from whatever, say your skin touched something hot, your afferent nerves would take those signals from your skin to your central nervous system. Your efferent nerves, though, They are your motor nerves. These are the ones that will take the message from your central nervous system and pass it on to your muscles or glands. So for example, like the hot pot example I use, say you're cooking, your hand touches a hot pot, your afferent nerves would take that information from your sensory receptors on your hand and send it to your central nervous system, and say, hey, hot pot, danger, alert, body, right? Then your efferent nerves would take the message from your brain saying remove hand from pot and bring it to the sensory receptors on your hand, therefore causing your muscles in your hand to move away from the pot. There are subdivisions of your peripheral nervous system. There's two of them. It's called the somatic nervous system, and the other one is the autonomic nervous system. So what is your somatic nervous system? This is what is stimulating your skeletal muscle in order for them to have some kind of tension, in order for an action to evolve from that. Your autonomic nervous system is going to be in control of cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, basically anything that automatically does the job without you having to make a conscious control of it. So it will tell your heart to be faster during an exercise because you need more blood movement and oxygen. It will cause your smooth muscle in your digestive tract to help move food during digestion. And your autonomic nervous system is going to be comprised of two other divisions. They are your sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we are going to learn what that actually means in the next couple slides, but kind of to give you an idea, your parasympathetic nerves are really your routine involuntary functions, versus your sympathetic nervous system is your like high alert functions. For example, like parasympathetic nervous system would be, or say your sympathetic nervous system would be something like you are in a tense situation, so your body starts to tense up. Your parasympathetic nervous system would be after the tension has passed, you realize that you don't feel so good, you have to like go to the bathroom, you have some kind of bowel movement, you start to get a headache. A lot of people who have like really big exams, their sympathetic nervous system kicks in where they're in full study mode, you're anxious, you're freaking out. After that huge exam has passed, you start to feel sick and depleted and fatigued, and you're like, why do I feel like this? And it's because your body was so tense for so long that you didn't even realize, and once that tension has passed, you are now relaxing, and so your body's kind of trying to return back to normal. So we just talked about two important parts of your nervous system, central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. If you have a different sheet of paper or you have room somewhere on your notes, I want you guys to copy what I'm going to write down, because this is going to really break down and give you an idea of what we just talked about to help you understand this. This is super important for this chapter, and also especially if you want to take anything related to biology or in the bio field or medical field. You are going to absolutely need to know this. This is like one of the fundamentals. So we said that your nervous system, So we have our nervous system, which is broken down into two parts. You have your central nervous system, also known as CNS. And this is where you have your brain and your spinal cord. Then you also have your peripheral nervous system, abbreviated as PNS. And this is where you have pretty much everything other than your brain and spinal cord. I'm just going to abbreviate SC for everything else, okay? Now, moving on, make this a little bit smaller. Let's break down your peripheral nervous system. So your peripheral nervous system is going to be broken down further into two parts. Your autonomic let me write that a little bit nicer. So your peripheral nervous system is going to be broken down into your autonomic nervous system. And the things that are going to be involved in your autonomic nervous system are going to be things that are going to control things that are automatic. So they're going to be unconscious. So you don't have to think about your heart beating, digestion, which involves digestion involves your smooth muscles. Your peripheral nervous system is also going to be involved with your somatic nervous system. Somatic nervous system has to do with skeletal muscle. So this is stuff that you do have control over, okay? Now, with your autonomic nervous system, you have two other things that go off of it. You have parasympathetic which basically means that this is the stuff that pretty much brings your body back to a normal level after you've had some kind of tension or like a flight or fight experience. You also have sympathetic, which is your high alert or also known as your flight or fight experience. So remember, your fight or flight experience is when you are in a tense situation. Say you're walking down a dark alley and somebody pops out at you and you punch them in the face, okay? That would be your fight or flight experience, and then you run for your life. Your parasympathetic is when you have gotten away from the danger and then you realize that you start to sweat because your body's overheated, so your body's trying to cool you down. Your heart rate is up because you just ran from a serious situation, so you're trying to get proper blood flow, and then your bowels start to not feel so good and you might have to hit the bathroom because they are starting to relax again, okay? So your parasympathetic is basically when you have these involuntary functions returning your body back to normal. So this is kind of a breakdown of what we just learned. So again, your nervous system broken down into your central nervous system and your, let me make this a little bigger. You have your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is then broken down into your autonomic nervous system and your somatic. Autonomic is then broken down into your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system as well. The next thing that we have to talk about is your nervous tissue. Now, this is also going to have some drawing involved to help you understand. So also get ready with your sheet of paper. I will let you guys know when to start those drawings when I show you how to draw them. So the first thing about the nervous system, the nervous tissue, is that there's two types. You have your neuroglia and you have your neurons. Your neuroglia are your glial cells, and then you have your neurons, which are your nervous tissue, pretty much. So your neuroglia are not your neurons, but they support the nervous tissue. They are four of them, four types of neuroglia in your central nervous system, and there's two of them in your peripheral nervous system. So the neuroglia in your central nervous system, okay? There are a couple things, couple labeling and identification that you need to know. The one is called the astrocytes. These are going to be located between the neurons and the capillaries. Capillaries bring blood and nutrients to your central nervous system, or to the neurons specifically. But basically, they link the capillaries that carry these nutrients to the neurons to protect the neurons from harmful substances that can be transported in your blood. So they play a very important role in protection of neurons. Then you have your microglia, which help to absorb and dispose of dead cells and bacteria, also an important thing for protection. You have your oligodendrocytes, which produce something called a myelin sheath. Your oligodendrocytes, remember, if you want to make a side note, these are located in your CNS, because there's a different type that form myelin sheath that are in your peripheral nervous system. You have to know the difference. So oligodendrocytes are specific to your central nervous system. They produce something called a myelin sheath, which actually wraps around the axon part of the neuron. We'll talk about all of this. And they help to produce this kind of like fatty insulation to help messages be transferred faster between neurons. And then you have something called the epidermal cells, which form a protective covering around the spinal cord and also the central cavities in the brain. So this is kind of a picture that you can see your astrocyte, which are the like turquoise tentacle looking things that connect your neurons, which are the blue, with the capillaries, which you see in red. So remember, your astrocytes are the ones that are doing this linking in order to protect the neurons from harmful substances that could be transported in the blood. You can see that the orangey yellow looking ones are your microglia. Remember, your microglia are also the ones that help to absorb and get rid of any dead cells or bacteria that can be harmful. You can see your oligodendrocytes down below the last one on the right side. These are the ones that are producing those myelin sheaths that are coating the axon, which is like the shaft part of the neuron that the messages get transferred in. Now we're talking about the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system is made up of something called the Schwann cells. Now remember, oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system produce myelin sheath. The Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system produce the myelin sheath for this system. And then you also have something called satellite cells, which pretty much serve as like support cells by cushioning. And then you can see that in the picture here, satellite cells are kind of going around the cell body. You see the Schwann cells that are forming the myelin sheath, which is like the body part of the nerve itself. Okay, so now we talked about the neuroglia. Let's talk about neurons. The neurons are made up of glial cells, obviously, which help to support and protect the nervous system. And then so the glial cell's main job is to protect the nervous system, and then the neurons are going to help transport information. So there's a couple anatomy terms that you need to know about the nervous system. We're going to go through these first, and then we're going to draw them out so that you can have a visual with you in order to better understand. So the first thing is called the cell body. The cell body is pretty much where you have the nucleus of the neuron located. And then you have something called dendrites, which are the ones that gather information or gather stimuli that are coming from other cell bodies of other neurons in order to transfer them down their axons. Axons are pretty much the body of the neuron that you can see right here. They're kind of like the skinny, long tails. And they help to transport impulses or stimuli that they receive from the cell body, which receives it from the dendrites, and they take it to either other axons or other receptors in order for a action to be created. So axons, they can transport impulses to muscles and things like that. Then you have the myelin sheath, which is a fatty layer. This helps to insulate the axon. They're not all going to be connected. There's going to be spaces between each myelin sheath. They usually look white. And the main job of the myelin sheath is to make sure that whatever stimulus or message you're trying to convey occurs in a fast rate. Then you have something called a neurolema, which is the cell membrane. And this is going to cover the Schwann cells and the myelin sheath, especially when we talked about in the peripheral nervous system. Then you have nodes of Ranvier. Remember I said how your myelin sheaths are not one continuous thing. If you look in the image here, you can kind of tell there's like little gaps between the myelin sheaths. And what happens is those gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier. You have two types of myelin, kind of what they refer to as myelinated or unmyelinated. If it's a white matter, it looks white. Therefore, that means there is a myelin sheath there. If it's gray matter, it's unmyelinated. That means there's no myelinated substance there. Okay, synapse is basically what happens at the end of a neuron. So the axon will it will take a message down itself, and then it will end up at the axon terminal. The axon terminal is going to pretty much be these little gaps that there's like a gap between the axon terminal and like the next nerve or whatever. But the axon terminal almost looks like a projection similar to the way that dendrites look like. And the axon terminals are going to have these little vesicles that are going to contain neurotransmitters. If you remember in the last chapter, we talked about neurotransmitters named acetylcholine, which are the ones that get sent out to something called the synaptic cleft, which is like the space between the axon terminal of one neuron and either a muscle or the cell body or dendrite of another neuron. And these vesicles will release these neurotransmitters that will trigger some kind of reaction to convey some kind of action or movement. There's three types of neurons. There's sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. The sensory neurons are involved in afferent. Remember, this means they're carrying impulses from the skin or organs to your spinal cord or brain. So this gives information from your external and internal environment so that your central nervous system can figure out what needs to happen. Then you have your motor neurons. Remember, motor always has to do with an action. So they're going to produce the action. So your efferent neurons are going to take information from the CNS, because your CNS is your control center, and they're going to say, okay, so we just got a message from your afferent neuron saying that there's some kind of issue on the skin because we're touching a hard object or we're touching a sharp object. And so then your efferent neurons will get the message from the CNS, which will say, okay, our message is to remove your hand from that object. And so your efferent neurons will take that information from the CNS and take it to the muscle or organ or whatever it is that is involved with the harmful stimulus to prevent any further harm from occurring to your body. Your interneurons or association neurons are neurons that form kind of like these bridges in order to transmit impulses between other neurons. So they're kind of like a helper that helps to convey messages and relay messages as well. This is a little table that you have with different types of axons with how many dendrites they have. So like bipolar is like one dendrite, one axon. Unipolar is single axon with dendrites. On the peripheral end, peripheral process, this is going to carry impulses to the body. Central processes is going to carry impulses to the cell body. Then you have multipolar, which means you have one axon and a bunch of dendrites. And these are going to be mainly found in the brain, specifically the cerebellum part of your brain. So if you need to pause and take a moment to fill this in, please do so. And then we are going to get ready to draw our axon, or I should say your neuron. Okay, so we are going to do what I said, which was that we are going to draw a neuron. So you understand what we talked about in all of the descriptions. So get out a piece of paper, get some colors out, let's have some fun in anatomy. So we're going to draw a neuron. The first thing that we need to do, if you follow my flow, is we are going to draw the cell body. And the cell body is going to have the nucleus, have some mitochondria, and these little projections are our dendrites. This middle part is going to act as our axon. Our axon is going to have little extensions at the end, which are going to be the axon terminals. Okay, so this entire area, which I will make. Okay, so this entire area here, this including the one that's in the middle, right here, this is all the cell body. Remember, this is what contains the nucleus, things like that. Another name for the cell body is also known as soma. So you might hear that reference as well. So the cell body is going to have the nucleus, excuse me, the nucleus, and it's going to have some mitochondria. Then we have these little extensions that I'm putting in blue. These are what? What are they called? Can you tell me? If you said dendrites, you are correct. So these are called dendrites. They collect incoming stimuli. Then we have something called the myelin sheath that takes up your axon. So now your axon is actually this entire thing right here. Ooh, that looks terrible. So this is going to be your axon. And your axon has little coverings to help transmit information faster called the myelin sheath. So these green little squares, notice that they are not simultaneously connected. There's gaps. So these squares are called your myelin sheath. All right. So your myelin sheath are fat layers that insulates the axon fibers. They look white and they help with fast transmission. I don't have space to write all that down, so I'm going to say it again so you can write it down. Your myelin sheath are fat layers. They insulate the axon fibers. They are white. I know I drew them in green, but if I drew them in white, you probably wouldn't see them. And they help with fast transmission. All right. The space that you see between the myelin sheaths, so here, here, and other between spaces. These are called your nodes of Ranvier. Why the name is so fancy, I don't really know. So these are the uninsulated parts of the axon, okay? And so these are really going to be where the axon is exposed, usually your signals will jump from myelin sheath to myelin sheath and not really go through your nodes of Ranvier. Then we have at the end, you have your axon terminals. So like these right here are your axon terminals. They'll usually have like some kind of like bulbous end like this. And the axon terminals might connect to like the dendrites of the next cell body, or like the next neuron. The axon terminals, which are right here, they are the ones that contain vesicles that contain the neurotransmitters that will help to be sent out in order to have some kind of communication with the next neuron. Now remember that in the CNS, your oligodendrites are the ones that produce the myelin sheath for the neurons in the CNS, and then for the neurons in your PNS, your peripheral nervous system, your Schwann cells are the ones that create the myelin sheath for that. A couple of reminders is that one, like I said, your Schwann cell actually is made up of the myelin sheath that it produces in the PNS, or your peripheral nervous system. It's made up of also the Schwann cell nucleus, and it's also made up of the neurolemma. And remember, the neurolemma is just a covering over the Schwann cell on the outside part of the myelin sheath. You might have to pause this video in order to get the entire diagram, but here it is. Here is your neuron cell. So make sure that you have this drawn out and labeled so that you can know this for the test and quizzes.